Welcome back to the People's Basics, the home of the universal basics of income, services, and rights. Today on the Commoner's Corner program, we're going to be talking to a candidate from Virginia's 11th District, Ali Dalsimer, and we're going to be getting to know her a little bit better in her journey of perseverance into running for office. We're going to be talking about what those key issues of her campaign are, and then most importantly, we're going to be talking about if she were to win, what is the actual plan of attack to getting these things accomplished? Because it's great to have ideas, but we need actionable solutions. So without any further ado, let's bring on Ali Dalsimer to the program. Ali, welcome to the People's Basics.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here for sure.
So Ali, I had the question for you. First and foremost, you had a very interesting bio when I was going through your website of perseverance from having to grow up in a single parent household to becoming a single parent yourself, and also choosing the path between like corporate law and going nonprofit route. Can you walk me through that journey of what informed you to the place where the right next step for your life right now is you wanting to serve in public office?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I found through my life that the choices that I've made that have been the right choices were the ones that were made with my heart and my gut. And anytime I made a choice that was based on, monetary reasons or some sort of perceived gain, that ended up being a mistake, right? And I made plenty of mistakes. But in the end, what guided me was just a sense of doing what was right for me. And in a broader sense, what was right generally. So I've had a very diverse background, as you pointed out. My father was stationed in Africa when I was little. So I was born in New York, but we moved to Africa when I was 6 weeks old. Came back when I was 5, moved, I lived in 8 different places the first 8 years of my life. Then, went to public school here, elementary school right down the road in Arlington. My dad went back overseas when I was in high school, and my sister and I would spend summers with him. Ended up coming back, went to college, graduated, didn't know what I wanted to do, waitressed and bartended for several years, which was actually amazing, and I loved it, and I was actually pretty good at it, but was working when everyone I knew and loved was not working. So, if you're in that industry, you work nights, weekends, holidays, and decided that wasn't the path I wanted to take. I wanted to be with my family. And then, as you pointed out in my journey and in my bio, I came back to DC and did choose to work at a nonprofit environmental foundation. And that decision was absolutely rooted in, I got the job offers. For those who don't know, I went on 2 job interviews the same day and was actually notified the following day that I had received both, I'd gotten offers for both jobs. And going to bed that night, I just was like, what am I going to do? I was dead flat broke. So I wanted the money. But the thought of working on acquisitions and mergers and I don't know, whatever, every day, just, it didn't seem meaningful to me. Whereas working on things like the projects they were working on at the foundation at the time were translocating black-footed ferrets, which were endangered, so that they could be in a new habitat so they could get back into the wild, and working on setting up international conservation efforts to stem the decline of migratory birds, which were, plummeting. The populations are plummeting. And I thought, that's cool, right? That's something that has meaning and value, and I could feel good every night. Fast forward a little bit, I did work my way up to managing the Natural Resources Program at the Department of Defense. And for those who don't know, that program's on the civilian side, and DoD has about 25 million acres of really high quality habitat, and actually has more listed an at-risk species per acre than any other land managing agency because, of course, access is restricted. So it was a super cool job. I was the climate lead for the program, which was great under Obama. You know, I worked on the White House Council and stuff, and then under Trump, not so much. So that position was, they couldn't fire me for cause. They literally just eliminated the position. On the upside, I was actually able to get through a stepwise guide for how to incorporate climate considerations into their land management documents. So that was a win, even if it cost me my job. That was cool because it brought me.
It's a last victory. Yeah, I
Yeah,
understand. That's at the end of the day the goal.
And it was the top priority identified by resource managers. It's what they really needed. Like, we want to do this. How do we do it? So. It was good. And at the time I was upset because there was still more I wanted to do. But, and I've told this story before, but, having that break and being able to be introspective and then seeing what was going on with COVID. I did try to start my own business, by the way, doing pretty well on that right till COVID hit, and then it didn't go very well. And then, my son and I were watching Knock Down the House, and I've been really struggling. Like, what can I do? I need to do something. Literally the Trump anti-environmental agenda was dismantling literally my life's work. Like, literally 30 years was going out the door with everything that he was doing, reinterpreting the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, for instance. And we watched Knock Down the House, and he said, you should run for Congress. And that was what lit that spark. And it really came down to, do I feel like there's a lot of sacrifice involved. For those who don't know, you really do give up a lot in terms of your personal time and whatever. But it was so worth it. And I'm so glad that I've made that decision, because we're already making a positive difference, and it was the right thing to do. And so that's the journey and how I got to this point.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through that. I'd love to ask your perspective. Obviously, you thought the move next was to try and get inside the House, where for so long you've been working in government and kind of on outside advocacy. Can you let the people know what powers Congress has that you, as one member of Congress, would be looking to try and push forward? Obviously, there's the matters of your life's work in environmental conservation, but can you talk about more of the issues of why you want the position of Congress, what you think you could accomplish in there?
Absolutely. I got to tell you, the biggest reasons that I'm running and the biggest differences with our current representative, and honestly, if our current representative supported these, I wouldn't be running, are I fully support universal single-payer healthcare, the true Medicare for all, not some of these new versions of Medicare for all that are coming out, but real, genuine Medicare for all. And I think that would have to be my top legislative priority, right? So Congress makes the laws, right? That's the big difference. When you're outside, like my old position, I made policies. Policies can be overwritten by laws. So, the policy is to implement the existing law. So by going into Congress, you get that power. And that would be a huge priority for me, as well as you point out, environmental. Our representative has talked about how we need to be carbon neutral by 2050, which means that you try to reduce carbon emissions on a graded scale, a gradient, by 2050, which in this district would reduce greenhouse gases by 26%. Yeah, so the Gulf of Mexico is on fire. It's 115 degrees in Portland. There are people literally dying of heat. We can't wait till 2050 to have a 27% reduction. We've got to be much more aggressive about this. So passing the Green New Deal Act and then implementing it is a huge priority as well. And the third pillar that I'm running on is the major difference between me and the current representative is that I fully support fully funding and equitably funding universal pre-K, K through 12, and public college and trade schools. Research has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt that the first few years of life are just so important for setting our kids up for success. And right now, the average pre-K teacher, if you can even afford pre-K, because it's so expensive. There was one year where I had my two kids in pre-K, and the cost of the pre-K was more than I was earning for the year. My husband and I made the choice because we knew that it was going to pay off, that it was too important. But literally, there was one year where it cost me $2,000 more than I brought home, than I made, actually, not just brought home, but like earned my salary, because it's ridiculously expensive, you know. And I could get off on a tangent on that. I mean, in World War II, when women back to the workforce, I don't know if you know this, but the government provided child care, day care for women, and of course, as soon as they came back, that all went away, which is ridiculous. And the reason it's so important is because right now, a child's zip code before they turn 8, you probably know this, is the single biggest predictor of whether they go to college or whether they go to jail. That's outrageous. Talk about setting kids up for failure. And that backs up to having this whole system where you fund your schools based on property taxes. So the rich people get all the great schools, and then the people who aren't owning their property and who are living in already disadvantaged areas, they can't even afford textbooks. So there's so much wrong with that. And we have to fund our teachers too. I'm just going to go off on a little tangent on this. We have to fund our teachers. The average preschool teacher is a high school graduate that earns approximately $12 an hour. That's not right. That's just setting them up for failure because you're not resourcing them. You're not training them properly. And kids are that's literally our future. And if we're going to compete on a global market, if we're going to make sure that we don't, end up with people dropping out of school because they haven't been able to keep up early on, or whatever the issues are, we've got to make sure that we're doing that. And frankly, we have to make sure that continues right through public college and trade schools, because if you're going to be competitive in the market, and if you're going to get a job that is forward looking, that's part of the Green New Deal. It's a new deal. It's a jobs program. It's a way to stimulate the economy, just like the former New Deal did, which was the biggest economic boom this nation has ever seen. We've got to make sure that we're doing that. So those are the three biggest reasons. That was, it's healthcare, it's education, and it's environment. Underlying all of that, and one of my first legislative priorities would be to try and start getting rid of the corporate influence, though, because if we can get rid of corporate money and corporate influence in politics, all those other things are going to fall into place. It makes absolutely no sense for someone like the current representative in this district, who takes money from Dominion Energy, which is an oil and gas company, to then vote in ways that would disadvantage the oil and gas companies. He's not going to do that, right? So, I mean, I've signed the pledge. I'm not taking any oil and gas money. I'm not taking any corporate PAC or dark money. I think we need to hold our legislators accountable in that way. And so we're actually working on drafting legislation that would have 3 parts. One, it would require representatives to identify all dark monies, like where are they getting their money? You can't say it's just from this PAC. Who's giving money to that PAC? And 2, to recuse themselves from going to work for any company that is one of their major donors for some years, probably 7. We're still talking about what's the ideal time frame for that, so that if somebody's getting money from, say, the telecommunications industry, they can't go, oh, great, I'm going to vote for all these, telecommunications bills, then I'm going to go work for AT&T as one of their corporate executives, to try and get rid of that. That happens a lot. And then, and then the third one is that they wouldn't be able to vote on anything that they receive. If you get money from telecommunications, you're not allowed to vote for something that would impact the industry, which would reduce the number of voters significantly per session right now. But I think it's important. And right now, I genuinely feel that too many representatives are serving corporate interests and not the interests of their districts. And that's a huge reason that I'm running, because we've got to focus on what the people genuinely need.
I think those are four good priorities, and I think it was important to bring up the democracy reform kind of at the end because I think that's the first and foremost roadblock to us getting any of the agenda accomplished. And so I have not heard those ideas proposed before, so I actually have to say I really like them the first time I'm hearing them because I have to say the revolving door is the big crisis because naturally we think the incentives of democracy is, oh, you should align yourself with the will of the people because you want to keep yourself reelected. But if that's not your real concern because, well, you have a backup nice gig secured by donors, well, then you don't really need to be as worried. But this matter of putting that ban in place of the revolving door, as well as stopping them from voting in person, I think is great. But I wanted to ask a couple clarifications on some of those other areas you mentioned. So first, I love the idea that you're talking about education funding and first and foremost, the disparity based of local funding. 35% of education funding on average of primary schools comes from local property taxes. And as you can imagine, poor areas are going to have less property value and therefore raise less money from that and therefore have worse quality schools. And that's a whole other worm you could get into about the whole redlining and the discrimination of why property values are so disparate in areas. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think that proper funding is? I'm assuming you mean as a federal level of funding. How would you try to address that? How much are you thinking we need to be providing? I think roughly right now it's roughly 1,500 on average we're providing from the federal level per school. What are you thinking and how do you raise that?
So here's something where I'm a little different than some folks. I'm not going to give specifics for an area that I'm not an expert on.
Okay.
And I have expertise in the environment. I can speak to details on that. I can say that right now, the U.S. is 35th out of 37 wealthy nations for percent of GDP that is spent on education. There's no reason. So right away, I can tell you, we're not spending enough, right? That's the first thing I can tell you. We're not spending enough. In addition to which, I saw a statistic not too long ago that said every dollar invested in early childhood care, like pre-K, has a return on investment of over $7 in future savings. So we need to be looking at our education spending in terms of an investment in our future and a stitch in time saves nine kind of approach. And the reality is that what we would really need to know if we had someone like Jamal Bowman involved, right? Someone who has worked in the education system, someone who really understands how those budgets works, what those resources need. I would defer to people who are educators who truly understand what what the needs are. My goal would be to align myself with those experts and support them in an inside-outside approach where we have people inside working for legislation. And if people are opposed to that, and there are people who are opposed to educating certain segments of our society, I think we all know that.
Yeah, we're dealing with that in Texas. My co-host is very familiar with that. She just covered that.
Absolutely. And so I think we need to then look outside and involve activists to try and pressure our legal representatives so that they can say, so that they're getting the pressure both inside and outside. I think that we're not doing a good job of really connecting those dots with the will of the people and the people's representatives, right? The House of Representatives was never meant to be an elitist body. It was meant to be farmers and blacksmiths and whatever, right? And so obviously those professions have changed. Our nation's citizens have changed. But those representatives are supposed to reflect the society, and we need to reconnect with that, inside
we're
out.
having too many career politicians right now. And you know what? You're absolutely right. I will also say the role of government itself has fundamentally shifted in certain ways where it's having more responsibilities over time compared to what the founders intended. But I certainly can agree with your notion that they do need to be better connected with the people. And I want to touch on that in one more moment of kind of how do we execute and accomplish these goals. But I had one more policy question I wanted to ask, which is on your subject of expertise in environmental conservation. I wanted to ask you, what is the appropriate transitionary timeline? Because we know there has to be some level of a transition. You lamented that 2050 is not the realistic goal. Can you talk to what you think the right path forward is?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, we've got to pass the Green New Deal Act and appropriate the funding to fully implement it. That's the first and foremost thing, and that's probably going to take a few months. It takes 6 months to a year for agencies generally to and businesses to fully embrace, implement, interpret, and get things going. So I think that we need to be starting as soon as it's passed, be up and running with preliminary programs and setting our infrastructure in place within 6 months to a year. And I fully see that we could have significant benefits accrued by the time we get to 2025, 2026. I think that by 2030, at the outside, things should be fully in place and running. And I think we'll have a huge return on investment. I mean, if you look at methane, for example, methane emissions, which are, significantly more damaging than carbon emissions, something like 80 or 85% of the methane reduction technologies already exist. We just don't implement them because there's no incentive to businesses to do that. So we need to incentivize the use of existing technologies, which is going to get the vast majority of the problem, under better control, and then invest in additional technologies. And I'm a big believer in funding research and technology because I think that innovation is really the only way that in the past we've gotten ourselves out of some severe scrapes, so to speak.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And the other clarification I wanted to have is like the process of keeping people whole, because there's obviously a large portion of our economy right now that is based off of fuels that are currently damaging our environment that we're going to have to phase out. And they don't necessarily at this point have maybe the direct skill set to go into clean energy. Maybe some will transition, but not the whole force. What do you think you do for those people? Obviously, this is kind of the big thing where the Republicans have been signaling the Green New Deal as a jobs killer. How do you think we can combat that rhetoric? Because obviously we're talking here, it's a job creator. There's so much infrastructure we could build. Where do you think they are getting this notion of that it's bad for the economy to address the environment?
Because they're looking at a micro level, and the reality is that some jobs are going to go away. If you're going to stop using coal mining jobs are going to go away, and those people are going to be very directly impacted. And we're going to get a little topic here, but this is why I support UBI, because you need to give people a basic income so that they can then use that time to retrain or whatever it is that works for them personally. It's people gain and lose jobs all the time. I lost my job. I'm now looking for a new job, basically, right? So what we need to do is facilitate and enable that process by providing resources, by providing a basic income that people can live on while they do that. Looking for a job is a full-time job.
Very much is. Yes.
Yeah. Taking a step back, though, to what you first said, I think for those of us who remember it, the Republicans said the exact same thing in the 1970s when we had the creation of when the Cuyahoga River went on fire and we had the creation of, the EPA, and we had the Clean Air Act, and we had the Endangered Species Act, and we had all these things passing in the 70s, right? And Republicans were like, oh my God, businesses are going to go, they're going to go bankrupt. Well, they found that in fact that wasn't the case, that a lot of these technologies that they were implementing, like scrubbers and whatnot, actually saved them money and made them more efficient. So, I say that they're crying foul without an evidentiary back, because all of history suggests that innovation and bold action that is well thought out and that is well planned leads to benefits at a societal level, not detriments. I think where we've seen a lot of harm is when we've tried things like, Reagan's trickle down economics where the rich got richer and, the poor went to jail. And Trump basically revitalized that. And, in the middle of a pandemic when people are losing their homes, losing their jobs, can't afford like literally the basics, we have, I think it was 40 new billionaires. It's outrageous. So, when you hear people talk about that, I think they don't really understand the historic fact-based context for that. And I also think that Republican leaders are doing their constituents a disservice because their constituents, the Republican workaday, people believe the rhetoric, and it's false. It's false rhetoric. Walking around, I stopped in and talked with a household down the road, and he was like, these liberals, they're gonna, whatever, they're gonna tax us. And I was like, you do know that's not right. And he's like, yes, they're gonna increase taxes. I said, yeah. Do you have $50 million?
Yeah.
No. I'm like, then they're not taxing you, right? Because they're not. It's just so I think Democrats do a poor job with messaging, and Republicans are fabulous at it.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme that we lament, is that we have all these policies that are sellable, but we're not selling them appropriately. And I think this kind of gets to a little bit of the tactical lens, which is like, I wanted to address, how do we, if you were to be elected in Virginia's 11th Alley, how do we actually start to get this implemented? You talked about like an inside outside strategy beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to hear how we get these things accomplished, because I understand we lament that Republicans are kind of attacking us on some of these core issues. But right now, the incumbent in office, Jerry Connolly, is a Democrat. It's a pretty safe Democratic area. And I'm wondering, how do we even get the Democratic Party to start addressing some of these things? Like, as you said, the first issue you said was Medicare for all. That was not even voted on positively by the DNC's platform for the party. How do you think we start to address this dynamic? What do you think strategically you would be thinking about trying to do messaging-wise if you were to be elected?
That's a great question. I'll give a little background on the district for those who don't know. I am running against a corporately funded incumbent. Our district is 75% Democratic. The last time a Republican won here was 2006. So it is a safe Democratic seat. I believe that the DNC and corporately funded Dems, like we've talked about earlier, have that they don't have the best interest of their constituents at heart because of the corporate funding. So in the environmental world, we talk about the tragedy of the commons. And for those who aren't familiar with the tragedy of the commons, what it means is that if you have a public good, a public space, and nobody owns it, then no one takes care of it. And you end up having it fall into disrepair in some way. And that's why the federal government needs to step in for those public goods. And frankly, why profit should never be a motive in a public good. A public good would be the environment, education, healthcare. Everyone needs them, and no one should make a profit off of them because it's a basic human need. In terms of messaging, I think that these corporate Dems are their worst enemies. They negotiate against themselves, and they, it's an interesting quote. Nancy Pelosi, a while back, a few months back, said, "We need a strong Republican Party." No one questioned that. And I looked at my son and I was like, you know why we need a strong Republican Party? So the Democrats can fundraise off it. That's the only reason. And I think that it's because of these corporate, the millions and millions of dollars in corporate funding going to our reps, that it's perverting their messaging and their actions. And if we can this is why I'm part of this movement, not taking any corporate PAC or dark money, signing the no gas pledge. I'm looking forward to eventually getting a Sunrise endorsement. Right now, for those who don't know, Virginia has a 2021 election, so all the local groups are not endorsing, which is it's frustrating, and it's an impediment, unfortunately, to our campaign, but that's okay. We'll talk with them after November, and we've already talked with several who want to support us. So we're looking forward to that. But I'm running along with so many other true progressives so that we can turn the tide, because if we can get enough people in Congress who are not motivated by corporate donors, then we're going to be able to get these things done. And the strategy is to try and get as many progressives, not just in Congress, but up and down ballot. So many people come up through the ranks, right? School boards, house races, state house races. We have got to turn out and vote. And if people would, really embrace that, and not just come on presidential elections, but really embrace their civic duty to vote in every election at every level, and vote for progressives up and down ballot, we're going to get momentum. And then if we're able to inside vote in ways that serve the people, and as I said earlier, if we hit roadblocks with other legislators, take it out. Go to the people, say, hey, local activist for this particular issue, whoever that may be, you need to get a rally together. You need to get people calling these congressmen, because Congressman X, Y, and Z, call them out by name, are not supporting this. Oh, and by the way, like my current representative takes money from Amazon. He takes money from Dominion Energy. He takes more money than all but 9 people in Congress from the military industrial complex. Shocker, he votes for every war. We need to hold these representatives accountable, and we need to shine a light on what's going on. People don't know. I had a conversation yesterday with a woman who had no idea, having lived in this district her entire life. She had no idea that our current representative does not support Medicare for all, does not support aggressive action towards global warming, and does not support universal pre-K. She genuinely thought he did. So that's what I think we need to do, is hold people accountable and just tell the truth.
I love that philosophy, because if you continue to focus on the corporate angle and make it specific, I think that's when it really resonates. When it becomes a catch-all phrase, I think it becomes almost like just just calling people corrupt, and it's kind of broad. But like when you make it specific, I think it really hits home. And when you make it localized and you actually have the organizing around it, I think it can really be effective. So, Ali, I really hope you can get to that point. So for the people who want to support you, obviously you'd love for some donations to combat the corporate money, and we include the website link in the description. But for the people who are outside of district, as many of our national audience will be, how are you looking for like volunteer support? What are you currently doing as you're gearing up for 2022? Because right now, as you said, you got the whole Virginia local stuff going on still. So what support are you currently looking for people to get involved with?
Yeah, thanks for that. As I said before, our biggest hurdle is in district is name recognition. So we're really trying to build our name recognition in district. In terms of the campaign overall, we have 3 needs. We need money, and that's because we've got to do things. No one ever wants to talk about this, but if we're going to have a chance, we're going to need to pay for some sort of flyers. We're going to need to pay for targeted Facebook ads. There's about 500,000 voters in our district. 50,000 of them voted in the last primary. So we need to target those 50,000 voters and let them know about our campaign and about my platform. So we need funds to do that. If it's $5, $50, there's some people who are making 6 figures out there. You can fork out the max, $2,900. Do it. We need it. The other thing we need is we need our message amplified. Being on your show is awesome, because it's a way to get our message out there. The more we can get our message out there, the more people learn about our campaign. So far, about 80% of the people that I've spoken to, when they learn about us, they are fully supportive of us. So we just need to get our message out there. So we need funds, we need campaign amplifiers. That's what I'm calling them. If you're a journalist who works for a paper, write an article about us, write about our campaign, or if you have a podcast or whatever, love that. And then we're also looking for campaign champions, and campaign champions are people who come in and bring their network of people in, either to help volunteer with us or to help fundraise for us. And we definitely need volunteers. We're going to need them, especially when we, start really hitting the ground and canvassing. But we also need people to like, share, and follow us on social media to get our message out, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have to say, it's absolutely true that candidates do need the help and money to really be competitive. It's unfortunate, but that's the current system we're in. And it's usually like, on average, from what I've been reading, it's like 200,000 is the goal to have just even a competitive campaign. And so please do help. We have the description below of the link to get to her campaign. So if you did enjoy what Allie was saying today, please do get involved. But Allie, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the People's Basics audience today?
I would like to share with the audience that I am in this for the goal of really trying to make this world a better place. I know that sounds hokey, but it's true. And I am working hard every day. And anybody who genuinely believes in trying to get universal health care, universal child care, trying to really, we've already missed the window for reversing climate change, but we can slow and stop it. Join us. If you don't join me, join another progressive candidate, a genuine progressive candidate. Our representative calls himself a progressive. He's not. Look at their platforms. Pay attention to what's going on. Vote. I would ask for everybody's help, because everybody is needed to make this happen. We need a revolution of the people, by the people, for the people, to get back to where we need to be.
I think it really is, honestly, that simple. We just need more people doing good, and we need to get people off the sideline and involved. So, Allie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and best of luck in your race ahead in Virginia's 11th.
Thanks. I did have a question for you.
Yeah, shoot. Love it.
So I looked you up and saw that you were formerly with IBM.
Yes.
I was wondering, how did you get to this place?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So first and foremost, I have had actually a long line of people who have worked in IBM, but that's not how I actually got in the door. So ironically, I've always had IBM in my blood. My mom worked at IBM, my grandfather worked at IBM, and so I very much knew about the company. I was originally wanting to be a doctor until my senior year of high school, did medical research and the like. But then I decided to get into the finance field because my dad, for the 1 year of his life where he was not a computer programmer, wanted to try out options trading. I thought it was cool to try and understand how the world worked. I went into finance, and then I started to learn much more about like the 2008, 2009 financial crisis.
Right.
And a little bit of that became not as attractive to me in some of its goals. And so I still had, at this point, graduated from college with a degree in finance, entrepreneurship, and economics. And so I said to myself, like, okay, what can I really get involved in? And so I became a consultant for IBM because I found consulting to kind of be similar to entrepreneurism in certain ways, where you kind of build up your own practice, different offerings to help people. And I wanted to get exposed to a wide variety of different environments. And IBM both had the technology as well as kind of the management services at the time that I thought that could be a good fit. And so I spent 3 years at IBM, going from a consultant to a senior consultant. And I worked on 9 projects in total during that time. And eventually I, because of the whole 2020 economic collapse, was a bit unfortunate and parted ways from IBM at that time. And at that point, I kind of leaned in and really tried to focus on turning this from just like my own show at that time into more of a formalized network. So it went from myself as one person to now we got a team of 20 around us. So it's been a growing process. But yeah, a lot of people may want to define me of like finance and all that, but it's like it was also a job at the time too. I applied to like 100 jobs and only so many say, hey, come back. We would love to work with you too. And so beggars can't be choosers. But I was blessed for the opportunity. I learned a lot. And there were certain things that made me feel unfulfilled too. You echoed that before, and I was like, you know what? That's not the life for me. I want to do something that brings a little bit more meaning to my life and feeling like I'm doing good for others. And so I hope we do that here, and I'm glad that we can give you the opportunity to have some bolstering of your own race, Allie. So please feel free to come back another time. Hopefully in 2022, we'll have an update of the race by then. But thank you for
Yeah.
spending the time with us.
Excellent. Thank you. I look forward to being back. And
You're
thanks for
very
sharing.
welcome. Oh, you're very welcome. I don't get asked about that a lot, so I'm glad we got to share with the audience. But have a great rest of your day, Allie, and
Thank you.
wishing you well ahead. Okay, everyone. So that was Allie Dalsimer, again, Virginia's 11th District. And if you want to get involved, we do have in the description section down below the link to her website. So please consider doing the donations. Please consider getting yourself volunteered. As she mentioned, the top priorities of her campaign are these universal basics and democracy reform, just like we have here. So it was a pleasure to be able to talk with her. That being said, in addition to supporting herself, come support us here at the People's Basics. In the description section down below, you'll find our Linktree link with all of our links to get connected with our network. Please also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as well. Make sure that you hit that like so that we get bolstered by the algorithm. So that being said, my universal people, I hope you all have a great day out there. And as always, I hope you stay calm.